Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a quiet homesteader is ambushed by fake HOA agents claiming dominion over his remote forest land, he doesn't just fight back. He ignites a wildfire of legal battles, exposés, and revenge. What started with a clipboard ends with a shotgun, and the collapse of a criminal empire. It was a Tuesday morning, dry, bright, and just cold enough that I could see my breath in the air as I finished mounting the last solar panel onto the utility rack. I'd been up since dawn. Coffee, checklist, tools, and 2 German shepherds pacing along the tree line like furry shadows. My wife and daughters had driven into town for supplies and school errands. I was looking forward to a quiet day of productive solitude until a white Ford Super Duty with an oversized HOA logo slapped on the side came crawling up my gravel road like it had somewhere it didn't belong. 3 people got out, matching windbreakers, shiny plastic badges swinging from lanyards, and clipboards that looked like they were used more for threats than notes. One of them, a tall man with a buzz cut and wraparound sunglasses, strode ahead like he was inspecting a military base. The other 2, a woman and a younger man, flanked him and began snapping photos of my porch, my generator, my dog fence. I didn't say a word at first, just watched from the rooftop until they got close enough to the garage. That's when I climbed down, took off my gloves, and walked toward them slow and steady like I would with a skittish horse or a rattlesnake I wasn't sure was dead. "You lost?" I asked, standing just inside the shadow of my shop. The buzz-cut one didn't smile. Instead, he reached into a file folder and pulled out a printed packet. "You're Evan Bridger, correct?" I didn't answer. "You're the current occupant of Lot 18, parcel code 117B? I stared at the packet. "That depends. Who the hell are you?" He held up his badge, plastic clacking against the lanyard. "Stephen L. Holtz, Inspection Supervisor with the Crescent Bluff Homeowners Association. We're here to notify you of a formal violation process. 38 infractions and counting." "Violations of what?" I said. "This isn't a neighborhood. This is my land." The woman cut in, flipping open her tablet. "Mr. Bridger, under the recent expansion of Crescent Bluff's managed territory, this property now falls within our jurisdiction. We mailed an inclusion package last month. You are currently not in compliance with our architectural and behavioral codes." I let that hang in the air a second. "So you're telling me I moved my family 12 acres out into the forest so some clipboard-waving HOA cult can find me for not having the right mailbox?" Holtz flipped to a page in his folder. "Violation list includes unapproved fencing height, non-standardized utility shed coloration, exterior generator usage after curfew hours, visible storage of construction materials, non-compliant animal breed, and inappropriate hardware on front. Entry door." He looked back up like he was reading me my Miranda rights. "You are being issued a formal notice of infractions totaling $11,400. You have 5 business days to begin corrective actions. Failure to comply may result in additional daily penalties." The younger guy tried to hand me a pen and a document titled Consent to Association Participation. I didn't take it. Instead, I tilted my head toward the 2 dogs sitting 10 yards away, muscles tense, eyes fixed. "You do realize you're trespassing, right? This land isn't under any HOA. It was never part of one. I have the county deed to prove it." The woman gave a tight smile. "That may have been true last year, but as of March 1st, our jurisdiction has been formally expanded. Check our online map." "Your map means nothing if the county doesn't recognize it," I snapped. "Sir," Holtz said, his tone tightening, "we don't need to debate this in the dirt. You're being given an opportunity to cooperate." That's when I stepped forward and said the only thing I'd been thinking since the moment they drove up my road. "Whose land are you standing on?" There was a beat of silence. Holtz didn't answer, so I turned and walked calmly back toward the front door. No yelling, no threats, no drama, just the methodical rhythm of boots on gravel, then wood, then tile. I opened the gun locker next to the coat rack, took out my Benelli M4, tactical matte black with a fresh oil shine, and chambered 1 shell with a clean, distinct shitchak that echoed out across the porch. Then I stepped back outside. All 3 of them were still standing there. I didn't aim it at anyone. I didn't need to. I lifted it skyward and fired once, 1 clean shot into the air. The echo cracked across the valley like thunder off the canyon walls. The dogs barked. A flock of birds exploded from the tree line. And the mighty representatives of the Crescent Bluff HOA, they ran. The younger one dropped his clipboard. The woman slipped, trying to sprint back to the truck. Holtz cursed and vaulted over a low boulder, tripping halfway and landing in a sprawl. Within 20 seconds, the white Ford peeled back out the driveway, flinging dust and pine needles like a kicked-up nest of hornets. I watched them go. Didn't say a word. Inside, my security panel blinked green. Motion detectors, facial cameras, front gate monitors, all rolling. The whole circus had been captured on 3 angles in 4K, and that clipboard, still lying in the grass? I picked it up with a gloved hand and flipped through it. Every page, dated, stamped, and loaded with HOA nonsense. Every signature, blank. This was going to be fun. The envelope arrived the next morning, tucked into my mailbox with far more precision than the usual junk flyers and utility bills. White, unmarked, except for a stamped return address, Crescent Bluff Legal Affairs Division. Inside was a neatly folded tri-panel letter on thick watermarked paper, printed in lawyerly font and signed in blue ink. It began with, "Mr. Bridger, you are hereby notified," and got worse from there. According to the HOA's legal counsel, I was now facing allegations of brandishing a deadly weapon during a municipal inspection, threatening the lives of authorized community officials, obstructing civic governance with intent to sabotage, procedural enforcement. They demanded I appear at a disciplinary compliance hearing scheduled for the upcoming Friday at the Crescent Bluff Community Center, an actual place I had never been to and never wanted to. Failure to appear, the letter warned, would result in civil sanctions, accelerated fines, and possible criminal referral to the county district court. I stood there for a long moment in the kitchen, reading it twice. Then I laughed once, short and dry, set it on the table, and walked straight into my office. I scanned the letter, sent it to my lawyer, and picked up the phone. "Bridger," came the voice on the other end. "Let me guess, someone poked the HOA bear with a 12-gauge. "Tori," I said, "you're gonna want to see this." Tori Sanders had been my attorney ever since I hired her to help draft the contracts for my home security business back in Utah. She specialized in property law, boundary disputes, and what she liked to call paper terrorism, civil harassment disguised as legal procedure. By noon, she was sitting across from me in my shop office with the letter, the HOA's inspection packet, and my deed all spread across the table. "This is amateur hour," she muttered, flipping through the pages. "Look at this signature block, unsigned. No certified notice, no legal jurisdiction explicitly cited, and their map." She pulled up the HOA's website on her laptop. Sure enough, they had published a bright, shiny, updated boundary map with an awkward lasso loop stretching well beyond their original subdivision. My 12 acres were now labeled as Parcel Z1, included without explanation. But when she cross-checked the county's GIS land registry, my property was still marked as unzoned private land, with no affiliation to any HOA, development trust, or community charter. "Classic move," she said. "They're banking on confusion and fear. Send enough letters with words like compliance and penalty, and most folks will fold. But you..." She looked up at me and smirked. "You fired a shotgun in the air and filmed it in HD. I leaned back in my chair. "Was that a legal problem?" Tori shrugged. "On your own land, not aimed at anyone, with no threats made. Nope. Montana law's on your side. Especially if they were trespassing, which they absolutely were. I've got 3 cameras that caught everything." "Even better." By the next day, we had filed a formal countercomplaint with the county sheriff's office, citing unlawful entry onto private land, attempted fraud, civil harassment, criminal impersonation of regulatory officials. I attached copies of the surveillance footage, time-stamped, complete with facial recognition overlays from my system. The sheriff's office logged it and opened a preliminary file. Meanwhile, Tori fired off a cease and desist letter to the Crescent Bluff Board, warning that any further contact or physical presence on my land would trigger a formal civil suit. I upgraded my perimeter defenses that night. A motion-triggered drone now patrolled the tree line at dusk. I installed an active beacon light system on the outer fence posts, red strobes that activated automatically if unregistered movement occurred near the access road. The 2 German shepherds got brand new collars that synced to the smart grid and pulsed a warning light if they started pacing. I wasn't preparing for war, I was preparing for clarity. On Thursday morning, a silver Toyota Camry with government plates pulled up to the edge of my gravel. A man in a field vest stepped out, clipboard in hand but different tone. He approached slow, hands visible. "Mr. Bridger?" he asked. "That's me. I'm Deputy Martin with the Ravalli County Sheriff's Department. Just want to talk, if you've got a minute." He was professional, polite, and seemed genuinely intrigued by the case. He'd been assigned to do the intake on our complaint and had already reviewed the submitted footage. "I'll be honest with you," he said. "We've had noise from Crescent Bluff before, but nothing quite like this." He asked to walk the property line, verify the footage timestamps, and cross-reference the coordinates against the HOA's claims. We spent 45 minutes mapping it out. By the end, Martin nodded, scratched something on his pad, and said, "Yeah, this stinks. I'll get this in front of the investigator by the end of the day." Before he left, he added, "Oh, and just between you and me, Holtz, that guy with the sunglasses, not a licensed municipal inspector, not on any official registry." I watched him drive off, then stood at the edge of my land for a long time, arms crossed. This wasn't just neighborhood drama. This was an organized operation, and it was only just getting started. By Friday morning, the air had changed. Not the weather, though a fresh layer of frost had dusted the tops of the pine trees, but something else, a shift in pressure. I could feel it. That old tickle on the back of the neck I used to get before walking into a breach scenario on the range. Something was coming. I spent the morning pulling camera footage from the previous week, combing through movement logs. Nothing since the shotgun episode. Aside from the usual deer and the occasional curious fox, the dogs were calm, no barking, no pacing. But I couldn't shake the sense that someone was working behind the curtain. Around noon, my lawyer Tori called. Her voice was sharp, focused. "Evan, you're going to want to sit down for this one." She'd been digging deeper, beyond the legal filings and past the county's parcel records. With help from a GIS specialist, she found something buried in the HOA's own website, a high-resolution PDF of their revised boundary map, complete with timestamps from the site's back end. "Guess when they uploaded it?" she asked. "No idea." "Exactly 3 days before you moved in." She emailed me the image. There it was, a red outline drawn right over my 12-acre property, marked in fine font as Z1 Transition Parcel. Below it, pending compliance integration. But when she cross-referenced it with the county's cadastral records, the real boundary lines showed no change. Legally, my parcel stood outside any HOA jurisdiction. No paperwork had ever been submitted to the registrar. No vote, no legal filings, nothing. "They faked it," she said. "Uploaded a map to make it look real, then used it to pressure people like you." I stared at the screen, anger crawling up my throat. "Have they done this to anyone else?" Tori was silent for a beat. 5 others so far. "I've already spoken to 2 of them," she explained. Over the past year, Crescent Bluff had expanded its territory 3 times, each time targeting undeveloped or recently sold parcels on the fringe of their real boundaries. They'd show up with printed violations, demand dues, and push unsuspecting landowners to sign consent to association forms, hoping no one noticed the scam. "And one of them," she added, "signed the damn thing. Didn't realize he was being conned until they started charging him monthly dues and fining him for having chickens." I let out a bitter laugh. "Chickens? Yeah, HOA doesn't allow livestock, even on a 10-acre homestead." Tori had already begun assembling an affidavit package to send to the county inspector general and the state attorney's office, but she wasn't done. "The people who came to your property," she said, "they're not just fakes, they're family." I blinked. "What?" "Karen Lowry, president of Crescent Bluff HOA. She's related to all 3 of them. Stephen Holtz is her nephew. The woman is her sister-in-law. The kid, her son." I didn't speak, just leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. "They're not licensed, Evan, not registered with any regulatory agency, not bonded, not authorized, nothing. This wasn't an inspection. It was a shakedown." Before I could reply, my motion sensor pinged. The exterior driveway cam caught a movement, slow, deliberate. I opened the feed. An older white pickup, different from the first one, was idling just beyond the property line, where the county road met my gravel. A man stepped out, walked to the rear of the truck, and began unloading something. I zoomed in. Yard signs. About 24 of them, each printed in all caps. "Now part of Crescent Bluff HOA. Regulated property. Violations subject to penalties." He began jamming them into the ground like he was sowing seeds. I grabbed my jacket, slipped the Glock into the waistband of my jeans, not for show, just for company, and walked down the path. When I reached the line where my land officially began, I called out, "You want to explain what you're doing on county right-of-way?" The man froze mid-hammer. He was mid-50s, clean-shaven, wearing a utility vest with a fake-looking HOA badge clipped to the collar. He turned slowly. "Sir, I'm under directive from Crescent Bluff Compliance Services. These signs are part of Phase 2 Territorial Visibility Program." "Phase 2 of what?" I asked. "Trespassing?" He cleared his throat. "Per community charter, it is our duty to provide notice of association boundaries." I pointed toward the gravel line. "That's not your boundary. That's public road and private land. You have no charter here." He gave me a look like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Mr. Bridger, I'm simply following instructions. You'll need to address this with the board." I stepped closer, my boots crunching on dry gravel. "Let me make this simple. If any of those signs end up past that line, they become trash. And I don't like litter." He started to speak, then seemed to think better of it. He picked up the remaining signs, tossed them back into the bed of the truck, and mumbled something about documenting the hostility. As he drove away, I caught his license plate on camera. Back inside, I logged the footage, printed stills, and called Tori again. "They're getting bolder," I said. "What do we do now?" She didn't hesitate. "We go public." By Monday morning, the HOA war had gone local. Tori had contacted a reporter she trusted at the Raleigh Times, a bulldog named Seth Whitman who'd made a name for himself covering land disputes, corrupt zoning boards, and the occasional developer bribery scandal. Within hours of hearing our story, Seth was at my gate with a notepad, 2 recording devices, and a look on his face like Christmas came early. He stayed on the porch with me for nearly 3 hours, going over documents, timestamps, video stills, and printouts of Crescent Bluff's fake boundary maps. He didn't say much while he worked, just grunted every so often or muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." He interviewed me on camera too, asked straight questions, got straight answers, no drama, no embellishment. I told him what happened. 3 people in fake uniforms marched onto my land, tried to extort $11,000, and ran like roaches when I fired a warning shot. Then they accused me of a felony and mailed me threats. By that evening, the Raleigh Times ran the headline across its homepage. "Private landowner claims HOA faked jurisdiction, filed fraudulent fines, armed showdown ensues." The next morning, the phone rang off the hook. Neighbors, contractors, retired landowners, ranchers. At least 9 different people called me to say Crescent Bluff had tried something similar with them. Most of them had ignored the letters, but 2 admitted they'd paid, just to make them go away. That's when Tori and I made a decision. We would file an official complaint, not just with the sheriff, but with the Montana State Office of Real Estate Regulation, the County Land Authority, and the Attorney General's office in Helena. We met with Deputy Martin again, this time inside the sheriff's actual office. He wasn't alone. He introduced us to Detective Mara Dillard, a no-nonsense investigator with salt and pepper hair, a flat stare, and a voice like a steel gate closing. She'd been assigned to take over the case once the public fraud angle came up, and she was already digging. "I've got something for you," she said, sliding a printed report across the table. It was a timeline, property boundary adjustments, deed activity, form filings. Karen Lowry has submitted 6 separate zone adjustment notices to the county in the last year, she explained. None of them were properly reviewed or approved, but they were enough to trick a few underpaid clerks into updating internal preview maps, the kind realtors and title agencies see, but which aren't legally binding. "So she exploited the preview database?" Tori asked. "Exactly. And when nobody noticed, she started planting signs and sending threats. Then came the kicker. The 3 individuals who showed up at your house," Dillard said. "We pulled their DMV photos, business licenses, tax ID records. You were right. Stephen Holtz is her nephew, Kimberly Holtz, her sister-in-law, and Brandon Lowry, the kid, her son. None of them are registered contractors, inspectors, or compliance officers. Hell, Brandon still has a juvenile citation for stealing mailboxes." Tori leaned back, exhaled. "They're not just corrupt, they're running a racket." But it didn't end there. Dillard opened another folder. Inside were copies of cashed checks, HOA fines, dues, and compliance fees, all funneled into a holding company called Civic Holdings Group, LLC. That company, as it turned out, had only one signatory, Karen Lowry. Tori went still. "That's embezzlement," she said quietly. "They're not just strong-arming people. They're laundering money through a fake HOA shell." Dillard nodded. "We've got grounds for multiple charges: conspiracy, fraud, impersonation, unlawful trespass, but it's going to take time to build it airtight." "Then what do we do in the meantime?" I asked. She looked up at me. "We keep them away from your property." 2 hours later, a temporary restraining order was filed against all 3 fake inspectors and the HOA itself. They were officially barred from setting foot on my land or communicating with me in any form. Violation would trigger immediate arrest. That night, while I sat on the porch with a beer and the dogs curled at my feet, I heard tires crunching on gravel again. I stood. A small SUV was parked across the road, just far enough to stay technically outside my property line. Inside, I could make out a silhouette. Female, blonde, stiff posture. She didn't get out, just sat there, engine running. I stared at her through the dark for maybe 10 seconds before she drove away. Next morning, my trail cam picked up footprints behind the southern fence. Someone had walked just close enough to trip the sensor. I showed the footage to Tori. "They're testing you," she said, "trying to see if you'll flinch." I didn't. Instead, I installed another set of floodlights, bought a second drone, and printed the full stack of documentation for a legal motion we both knew was coming next. It was time to take Karen Lowry apart, piece by forged piece. The ceasefire didn't last long. Barely 48 hours after the restraining order was granted, my mailbox exploded, literally. At first, I thought one of the dogs had knocked something over. There was a loud metallic thump around 2 in the morning, followed by the sound of scattering debris. But when I went out with a flashlight, I found the steel mailbox, the new one I'd installed 2 weeks prior, blown off its post, shrapnel flung across the gravel like confetti. The bracket was warped. One of the bolts had embedded itself into the side of a tree trunk 5 feet away. It wasn't a firecracker. It was an improvised explosive, small, precise, enough to send a message. I didn't call the HOA. I called Dillard. Within an hour, a forensic team from Missoula was on site. They combed through the fragments, took samples, and boxed the remains for lab analysis. One of them, a guy named Riley, said it looked like a CO2 cartridge rigged with black powder. Amateur, but deliberate. "This isn't just harassment anymore," Dillard told me. "This is escalation." She requested security footage. Lucky for us, I had the entire perimeter recorded from 6 angles. It wasn't high-res in the dark, but it was enough to show a tall figure approaching the road around 1:41 a.m., hooded, wearing gloves, carrying something in a brown bag. The silhouette looked familiar. We zoomed in. I paused the frame. That slight limp on the left side, the same hitch I remembered from the guy who dove into the bushes when I fired that warning shot. Brandon Lowry. Next morning, Dillard filed a motion to expand the charges, now including felony vandalism and reckless endangerment. I filed my own report at the sheriff's office for attempted intimidation and destruction of property. But the real bomb came, pardon the phrase, when Seth Whitman published his follow-up article, Crescent Bluff HOA, accused of coordinated extortion scheme, restraining orders filed, explosive device confirmed. He didn't pull punches. Named Karen Lowry, Brandon, Kimberly, and Stephen directly, included a scan of the court order, quoted the county assessor who publicly confirmed that my property was never within HOA boundaries, cited interviews with other victims. And he included screenshots from the surveillance footage. I watched the online views tick into the tens of thousands by noon. Local news stations picked it up, then regional ones. A segment ran on Channel 6 about fake HOAs operating as neighborhood mafias. By dinner, my wife's phone buzzed nonstop with messages from friends, old colleagues, and even some of her clients asking if she was okay. But the best message came from an unexpected source. The county recorder's office called to confirm they were suspending all recent boundary amendments filed by the Crescent Bluff HOA pending a full audit. They'd also launched an emergency review of the parcel history for 6 other properties now believed to have been illegally annexed through forged HOA paperwork. I poured a drink, sat on the porch, watched the sun dip below the ridge, and then headlights again. This time it was a county vehicle. I recognized the decal, Office of Code Enforcement, but it wasn't a random inspection. It was a man in a brown jacket holding a clipboard and a worn briefcase. He introduced himself as Caleb Morton, a compliance investigator out of Helena, said he was assigned by the Attorney General's office to assess whether HOA Crescent Bluff had been operating outside state legal parameters. He had read the articles, seen the footage, and now wanted to walk the perimeter of my property with me, document signage, review the installation dates of my security systems, fencing, generator location, all of it. "This is bigger than we thought," he said. And they might have been pulling this stunt for years, and not just here. By the time we were done, I had given him copies of every record I owned, the land deed, drone photos, dated permits, even archived GPS data from my property mapping software. "Thank you," he said, shaking my hand. "This is the kind of case that changes legislation." Tori later said she saw a fire in my eyes that hadn't been there since we moved. Maybe she was right. Because that night, I opened my laptop and started typing. Not another complaint. A civil lawsuit. We were going for the throat. The lawsuit wasn't a bluff. By Monday morning, my attorney had filed a civil suit in district court against the Crescent Bluff HOA, its acting president, Karen Lowry, her 3 relatives, and the HOA's legal counsel. The list of charges was long and legally loaded: fraudulent misrepresentation, attempted extortion, malicious prosecution, trespass, conspiracy to defraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We weren't going for a slap on the wrist. We were aiming to rip the whole operation out by the roots. The lawsuit immediately froze any HOA activity related to boundary amendments, member fees, enforcement actions, or architectural review claims. Their bank accounts were temporarily locked for audit. The court issued a temporary restraining order preventing anyone from the HOA from contacting me, my family, or stepping within 200 yards of our property line. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, but the next day, I woke up to find my security drone missing. The charging station near the garage was empty. The mount had been unbolted, cleanly, professionally, and there were tire tracks leading away from the tree line. I checked the security feed and found a gap. From 2:07 to 2:26 a.m., the camera went black. Not just one camera, 3 separate feeds cut simultaneously. Someone had hacked into the system or jammed it. Now they were trying to remove my surveillance, to blind me. Either they were desperate, or they were trying to erase something they knew was still on record. That same afternoon, I got a call from Caleb Morton, the state investigator. "I've been digging," he said. "You're not the only one." He forwarded a set of internal documents, anonymous leaks, showing Crescent Bluff HOA's expansion committee had drawn up proposals to absorb up to 18 non-HOA parcels over the past 2 years. 5 had already been processed, 3 had resulted in lawsuits, including mine, and 10 were in preparatory phases. They had a whole playbook: initiate contact, overwhelm with citations, insist on jurisdiction, fabricate a revised map, then demand payment or force signatures. It was systematic, coordinated. I told Morton about the drone. He wasn't surprised. "These people operate like a racket," he said. "You're dealing with the HOA version of a hostile corporate acquisition, and they're afraid now. That makes them dangerous." Later that evening, I received an anonymous email. No subject, just one attachment: a PDF scan of an internal HOA memo. Header: Phase 3 Consolidation Strategy. In it, Karen had written, "Target properties 7 to 10 are expected to offer resistance. Legal ambiguity is our leverage. Appearances of authority must be maintained. Physical presence increases compliance likelihood." They referred to my family and land as Property 9, Forest Boundary Northeast. Not a name, a number. That's when I got angry. I printed the memo, took it to the sheriff's office, filed another report, this time requesting investigation into racketeering under the Montana RICO statutes. Sheriff Howard, a blunt man with decades of desert lines around his eyes, read the memo slowly. Then he looked at me. "This isn't a neighborhood dispute anymore," he said. "It's organized fraud." He asked for all footage, documents, and logs. He said he'd loop in the county prosecutor and, if necessary, the Montana Department of Justice. I drove home through a sideways rain, every mile soaked in a slow, boiling fury. This wasn't about fences or mailboxes anymore. They had stolen surveillance, falsified maps, tampered with tech, threatened my family, and tried to erase us from our own land. That night, I rewired the entire security grid, hardlined everything, triple encrypted backups to off-site servers, put in 2 new motion-sensitive floodlights and a separate line to a local private response firm I used in my old job. They thought they could play games, but I had 12 acres, an iron will, and nothing left to lose. By Thursday morning, the local paper had picked it up. Ex-Sheriff Trainer sues HOA for fraud and extortion. The headline stretched across the front page of the Gallatin Sentinel with a grainy photo of me, arms crossed in front of my house, and a long caption summarizing the key facts. The moment it went public, the phones started ringing. Not mine, my attorneys, calls from other landowners, calls from people who'd been through the same circus with Crescent Bluff, only they hadn't had a shotgun, cameras, or a lawyer tough enough to hold ground. One of them was an old rancher named Chet Norris. Lived on the west edge of the valley, had inherited his land in the 60s. He told me how 2 years ago, the HOA had sent compliance officers to inspect his barn and issue fines for debris on his fence line. He didn't even know what HOA they were talking about. They said his signature was on a form. It wasn't. He'd been tricked into joining during a land survey agreement. Now he was paying monthly dues and didn't know how to fight it. Then there was June Markley, a widow with 5 acres near the river. They'd threatened to place a lien on her home if she didn't repaint her tool shed. She hadn't fought it either, just paid and kept her head down. This wasn't just my fight anymore. Meanwhile, the sheriff's office, working with state investigators, got access to HOA financial records. What they found sent things spiraling into chaos. Karen Lowry had funneled over $830,000 in HOA improvements to a shell company registered under her cousin's name. That company had then subcontracted repairs to her own personal LLC, one that didn't exist in state records until 6 months prior. The money trail was circular, closed loop, classic laundering. Fines went in, invoices went out, and Karen's personal bank account fattened in silence. But the real nail in the coffin was the forensic GIS report. At my attorney's request, we hired a licensed geospatial analyst to compare the official county cadastral maps with the updated HOA expansion map that Karen's team had distributed and uploaded online. The analysis was brutal. The HOA map had been built using Photoshop, not official survey data. Lot boundaries were dragged, erased, and redrawn without any record of legal filings, zoning board approvals, or updates to the tax roll. My land, Chet's, June's, and 4 others had simply been recolored, as if someone had drawn a circle with a red pen and declared it law. It wasn't even sophisticated. It was just arrogant. That same day, a judge issued a search warrant for the Crescent Bluff HOA office and Karen Lowry's residence. They executed the raid on Friday morning. I wasn't there, but the footage hit local news like a thunderclap. Agents wheeling out box after box of files, computer towers sealed in evidence bags, Karen in a bathrobe, arms crossed, screaming at the cameras. Her lawyer nowhere in sight. By afternoon, the HOA's website was taken offline and the board issued a temporary suspension of operations due to technical audit. That's corporate coward speak for "we're imploding." But even as I sat on my porch watching the sunset break across the Pine Ridgeline, a storm was still building, because that night, a black SUV pulled up across the dirt road from my gate. It didn't come in, didn't flash lights, just idled for 5 minutes, then drove off. Next morning, someone had fired a BB pellet through the back window of my truck. I reviewed the footage. No plate, no face, just a shape, moving fast in the dark. This wasn't over yet. I didn't sleep much that weekend. Every noise outside set me on edge. The wind rattling the gutter, a coyote howl in the timberline, a damn pine cone hitting the tin roof. I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. There's a difference. Paranoia is fear of the unknown. Preparedness is knowing damn well someone's already tried you once and might try again. I reinforced the perimeter, extra cameras, thermal sensors, spotlights on motion triggers. My daughters thought it was a cool project. My wife, not so much. She didn't say it, but I could see it in her eyes. She was tired of the war, and I didn't blame her. But the war wasn't done. Monday morning, the courthouse hearing was scheduled. My countersuit against the HOA, the fake inspectors, and Karen Lowry was now fully joined by the state attorney general's office. Turns out, they were preparing their own criminal case in parallel and had just been waiting for the evidence dump we provided. I walked into the courtroom in jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt. No suit, no tie. Let them see who they tried to mess with. Karen showed up with 2 lawyers and no shame. She tried to argue the land maps were interpreted in good faith and that the inspectors were authorized volunteers. The judge cut her off in 3 minutes flat. He'd read the forensic report, seen the footage, the falsified documents, the bank transfers. The civil hearing became a multi-claim proceeding. Charges included fraudulent misrepresentation of jurisdiction, forgery of boundary maps, harassment and trespassing, attempted extortion via false authority, unauthorized use of municipal emblems, and conspiracy to defraud private landowners. It wasn't just me anymore. Chet, June, and 4 other plaintiffs had joined. A class action was forming right there in the room. Karen's lawyers asked for recess. The judge denied it. He called a formal review and moved to freeze HOA assets pending outcome. Within 72 hours, Crescent Bluff HOA was officially dissolved. Karen Lowry was arrested later that week, charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and criminal impersonation. Her so-called inspectors, her nephew, son, and personal assistant were charged with trespassing and impersonating public officials. Even her lawyer got burned, disbarred for knowingly filing documents based on forged data. But my case wasn't just about winning in court. I filed a civil damages suit for $850,000, harassment, attempted extortion, invasion of privacy, reputational damage, and legal fees. After settlement negotiations, the HOA's insurance paid out $500,000, and the state approved a lien against Karen's personal property for the rest. A month later, I had new gravel poured on my driveway, put up a bigger gate, mounted a new sign at the entrance. Private land. Trespassers will be prosecuted. This isn't your HOA playground. Reporters kept calling. Some wanted to turn it into a podcast. Others asked if I'd testify in front of the state assembly about property rights. I wasn't looking for a spotlight. I just wanted my damn land back. Still, something came of it. The state passed a new measure, the Bridger Amendment. It requires that all HOA boundary expansions be approved through recorded county filings, verified property owner signatures, and third-party geodetic review. No more surprise annexations. No more red line fraud. My daughters sleep peacefully again. So do I. Because now, anyone thinking of pulling a fast one on a man like me knows they better bring more than a clipboard and a fake badge. They better bring a warrant.